$50,000 a month from detailing cars in people's driveways. That number kept bothering me. Because if a full detail brings in around $300, you'd need roughly 167 jobs every month to reach $50,000. But one full detail can take 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours. And suddenly the math stops making sense. One person simply doesn't have enough hours. So either that $50,000 month number is misleading, or there's another part of this business that isn't obvious from watching someone clean a car. And that's what I wanted to figure out. I started with the simplest version. One customer pays $300. For the base case, materials come to about $24. That leaves $276. And honestly, that looked pretty good. No big storefront. No warehouse full of inventory. Just a vehicle, some equipment, chemicals, and somebody willing to do the work. My first thought was that maybe the internet was basically right. Maybe the unusual thing about detailing is simply that customers pay hundreds of dollars for a service that doesn't require hundreds of dollars in materials. So before I did anything else, I checked the prices. And those prices were real. The operator rate cards in the research put full details around $200 on the low end of our model, $300 in the middle, and $450 or more at the high end. Premium services can go much higher. Ceramic coating packages in the research reached about $800 to $1,500 or more. So the first part of the story held up. People really can pay serious money to have a vehicle detailed, which made the $50,000 claim feel a little less ridiculous. But price is only half of a business. The other half is what it actually takes to earn that price. And that's where the first problem appeared. A full detail can take around 3 to 5 hours. For the $300 base case, I used 4 hours. So before I've subtracted a single real cost, that job is producing $75 of gross revenue for every service hour. At $200 over 3 hours, it's about $66.67 per service hour. At $450 over 5 hours, it's $90 per service hour. That was the first time I stopped looking at this as $300 for cleaning a car, because the customer wasn't only buying a clean car. They were taking a block out of somebody's day, and those blocks are limited. So I wrote down $300 again and started removing the obvious costs. Materials were $24. That left $276. Then I added the vehicle allocation. Using 15 business miles in the base model, that was $11.40. Now I was at $264.60. Still good. Actually, if I stopped right there, I could make this business look almost absurdly profitable. A $300 invoice. Only $35.40 gone between materials and the vehicle. More than $264 still sitting there. And for a moment, that made the whole thing look easy again. But something still didn't add up, because the detailer didn't magically appear next to the customer's car. They had to drive there. And mobility creates two different costs. The first one is obvious. Miles cost money. In our model, another 20 business miles represents $15.20 of vehicle cost. But the second cost is much easier to miss. Driving also uses time. And unlike fuel, that time can't be recovered later. If I spend 30 minutes driving between two customers, that might not look terrible on an expense sheet. But those 30 minutes can't be sold to anyone either. And that changes the way I have to look at the entire business. Because a $200 job taking 3 hours uses 3 hours of the calendar. A $300 job taking 4 uses 4. And a $450 job taking 5 uses 5. So maybe price per car wasn't actually the number I should have been watching. Maybe the real question was, how much money does each hour of this business actually leave behind? So the real question became, what does each block of the calendar leave behind after every cost is counted? I went back to the $300 job. We already had $24 of materials and $11.40 for the vehicle. Next came the payment allocation. That removed another $9. Now the $300 had become $255.60. Then I added $10 of other overhead allocated to the job. That brought it down to $245.60. And at this point, my original idea was still alive. More than $245 was left from a $300 invoice. If I had stopped counting there, I would still have called this a very high margin service. Then I asked a question that has nothing to do with washing a car. Where did the customer come from? The acquisition number in this model is the least certain number in the packet, so I want to be careful with it. The research did not find a clean national detailing specific booked customer benchmark. Instead, the model uses a broader home service lead cost proxy and a booking assumption. That gives us about $86 for a booked customer in the base case. It is a model input, not a claim that every detailer in America pays exactly $86. But it is useful because it shows what happens when demand is not free. So I took the $245.60 that was left and removed $86. Now I had $159.60. That one line changed the picture more than the chemicals, payment cost, overhead, and vehicle allocation combined. And it also explained why two identical $300 details can have completely different economics. One customer might come from paid advertising. Another might come back because they already know the business. The car can be the same. The work can be the same. The price can be the same. But the money left behind can be different. In the lower acquisition case from the research, that cost falls from $86 to $30. That improves the job by $56. Nothing changed about the detail itself. The operator did not get faster. The chemicals did not get cheaper. The customer did not pay more. The business just spent less money filling that slot in the calendar. And across 500 jobs, $56 becomes $28,000. That was the first moment where I stopped thinking of marketing as something outside the business. Acquisition was part of the unit economics. But I was still missing the biggest line of all. I had not paid the owner. The base detail takes 4 hours. The labor benchmark in the approved research is $17.23 per hour. 4 hours makes the economic value of that labor $68.92. So I finished the waterfall. $300 of revenue, minus $24 of materials, minus $11.40 for the vehicle, minus $9 for the payment allocation, minus $86 for customer acquisition, minus $10 of overhead, minus $68.92 for the owner's labor. And what is left is $90.68 of economic profit. That is still a profitable job. But it is a very different story from looking at $300 of revenue and $24 of chemicals. I started with a job that looked like it might keep almost everything. I ended with about $90.68 after giving the owners 4 hours in economic value. So then I wanted to know how sensitive that result was. Was $300 just an awkward middle case? What happens when the price changes? I started with the low price case. The customer pays $200. Materials are $16. Vehicle allocation is $11.40. Payment allocation is $6. Customer acquisition is still $86. Overhead is $10. And 3 hours of owner labor at $17.23 is $51.69. Finish the entire waterfall, and the economic profit is only $18.91. That number bothered me more than a loss would have, because the business does not look broken. The customer paid $200. Cash came in. The owner worked. The car got cleaned. From the outside, it looks like a successful job. But after valuing the owner's time and counting the acquisition cost, the business created only $18.91 of economic profit. So being busy is not the same thing as building a good business. Then I tested the other side, a $450 premium job. Materials are $36. Vehicle allocation is $11.40. Payment allocation is $13.50. Acquisition is $86. Overhead is $10. And 5 hours of owner labor is $86.15. That leaves $206.95 of economic profit. Now put all three jobs next to each other. The $200 job leaves $18.91. The $300 job leaves $90.68. The $450 job leaves $206.95. That is a $188.04 difference in economic profit between the low and premium cases. And the premium job only uses 2 more service hours in our model. That does not mean every operator should charge $450. The market still has to accept the price. and the service still has to justify it. But it does mean something important. When hours are limited, the jobs that fill those hours matter enormously. I paused on that comparison because it exposes something that cash accounting can hide. Imagine two operators finishing the day with money in the bank. One spent the day on lower priced work. The other spent the day on fewer, better priced jobs. Both can say they were busy. Both can say customers paid them. But those statements tell me almost nothing about whether the day was economically good. The calendar does not care how hard the operator worked. It only records what each block of time produced. That is why I would be careful with revenue screenshots in a business like this. Revenue tells me demand exists. It does not tell me whether the operator bought that demand too expensively, drove too far to serve it, or used too many hours delivering it. The $18.91 case makes that especially clear. There is nothing obviously disastrous about the job. It still has a paying customer. It still covers the modeled costs. It still pays the owner for the 3 hours of labor we assigned. But after all of that, the business itself barely adds anything. Compare that with $206.95 in the premium case. Now, the same basic category of business has enough room to absorb mistakes, downtime, or future investment far more easily. That is why the question changed for me from how much can I charge for a detail to what kind of work deserves a place on this calendar. At this point, I crossed out one of my first ideas. More cars equals more profit. Not necessarily. A calendar full of weak jobs can be worse than a smaller number of stronger ones, and that is when the business finally clicked for me. The scarce resource was not the soap. It was profitable time. A pressure washer can sit there all day. Extra chemicals can be ordered. More towels can be bought. But one person still gets one calendar. Once today's productive hours are gone, they are gone. You cannot put Tuesday afternoon on a shelf and sell it next month. That makes mobile detailing look a little like an airline. An empty seat on yesterday's flight cannot be sold today. And an unused profitable hour in a local service business disappears in the same way. But detailing has another complication. Some hours disappear even when the operator is working. Travel. The extra 20-mile example costs $15.20 in the vehicle model. But if those miles also create a large gap between appointments, the real damage can be bigger than $15.20. The operator loses part of the inventory they were trying to sell. Now, route density made much more sense. Two customers paying the same $300 are not necessarily equally valuable. If one lives 10 minutes from the next appointment and the other pulls the business far away from its route, the second customer can consume more of the day without paying more for it. Then acquisition came back into the picture. At $86 per booked customer, our base job leaves $90.68. If acquisition rises to $130 with everything else unchanged, economic profit falls to $46.68. Same price. Same 4-hour detail. Same materials. Same vehicle assumption. Same quality of work. But almost half the economic profit disappears. That is the risk flip I was looking for. A detailer does not have to become bad at detailing for the business to become weak. It can become too expensive to keep the calendar full. And the opposite is true too. If repeat customers, referrals, or organic discovery pull acquisition toward the $30 case, the model improves by $56 per job. So suddenly, the best customer was not just the person willing to pay the highest invoice. It could be the person who comes back, lives near other customers, and keeps the calendar productive without having to be bought again. That gave me a much better way to think about the business. The job is cleaning cars. But the economics are about allocating a limited number of hours to customers that leave enough money behind, which brought me back to the number that started all of this, $50,000 a month. If the average ticket were $300, you would need about 167 jobs a month to get there. That is around 38 or 39 jobs a week. If the base detail takes 4 hours, a solo operator cannot simply work a little harder and make that math fit. The calendar stops them. So the $50,000 claim only starts to make sense when the business changes shape. The approved research included a real detailing industry case around $50,000 a month with roughly 2 to 3 people involved. And the cost structure was not just a larger version of the solo operator. The reported example included about $19,000 of labor, about $1,500 of operating costs, and about $4,000 of fixed costs. That is what scaling actually changes. The owner is no longer only asking, can I make my own hours profitable? Now the question is, can I keep other people's hours profitable too? That requires enough demand to fill the schedule. It requires pricing that can support payroll. It requires routing, quality control, rework, scheduling, and enough customer acquisition to keep the crew busy without spending the margin away. An idle pressure washer is annoying. An idle paid employee is expensive. So adding capacity is not automatically the same thing as adding profit. And there is another reason scale changes the story. When you are solo, an empty afternoon mostly costs you your own missed opportunity. When you have a crew, empty capacity can become a company expense. That makes demand quality more important as the business grows, not less. A solo operator might tolerate an awkward route because at least the job puts money in the bank. A company with multiple people has to think about whether that job helps fill the system efficiently. Does it fit the route? Does the price support the labor? Did the company pay too much to acquire it? Will the customer come back? None of those questions require a different pressure washer. They require a better operating model. And that is what finally made the $50,000 number believable without making it look easy. The number is not proof that mobile detailing has unlimited upside. It is proof that once the owner's personal calendar becomes the bottleneck, growth requires building another layer of the business around people, demand, and utilization. The service stays recognizable. The economics do not. And that made me wonder which version of this business actually makes the most sense. First, the weekend version. At 2 base case jobs per week, the model produces about $785 per month of economic profit. That is about $9,430 per year. And remember, that is after assigning the owner's detailing hours, the $17.23 labor value used in the model. For a side hustle, this is where the business starts to make sense to me. You do not need to fill 5 days a week. You can start with a smaller equipment setup. The research put a lean setup around $1,500 to $2,500. A more professional setup was around $3,500 to $6,000. And a premium setup was around $8,000 to $15,000 before major vehicle differences. Using the professional $3,500 to $6,000 range and the $90.68 base economic profit, recovering the startup capital takes about 39 to 66 base case jobs. At 10 jobs a week, that works out to around 4 to 7 working weeks. That is not a promise. It assumes the base economics actually hold. But at least now the low startup cost claim has a real break-even attached to it. There was also a subtle difference between low startup cost and low business risk. Those are not the same thing. The equipment can be comparatively accessible, especially in the lean and professional ranges from the packet. But after the equipment is purchased, the business still has to earn its way back to zero. That is why I prefer the break-even number to the startup number by itself. A $3,500 to $6,000 professional setup sounds manageable compared with many businesses. But in the base model, it still represents about 39 to 66 completed jobs before the startup capital is recovered. That forces a better question. Can the operator actually find those jobs at the prices and acquisition costs used in the model? Because cheap equipment does not help much if the calendar stays empty. And a full calendar does not help much if it is filled with the $18.91 kind of work. Startup capital gets you into the game. Unit economics decide whether staying in the game was worth it. Second, the full-time owner-operator. At 10 base case jobs per week for 50 weeks, the model creates around $45,340 per year of economic profit. Again, that is after assigning a labor value to the owner's detailing hours. So there are 2 different rewards in the model. The owner receives the economic value of the labor they perform, and the business produces the modeled economic profit on top. That can make the owner-operator version attractive, but the ceiling has not disappeared. One person still has one calendar, which brings us to the scalable version. The scalable business solves the personal hour ceiling by adding people. But now it is no longer enough to be good at detailing. The company has to keep technicians productive. The $50,000 a month case makes that visible. About $50,000 of revenue, about $19,000 of labor, about $1,500 of operating costs, about $4,000 of fixed costs, and roughly 2 to 3 people involved in the operation. Those are not the economics of one person with a bucket. They are the economics of a small service company. And that is why I would never scale the solo $90.68 profit by 2 or 3 and call it done. The moment another person is added, the model changes. More capacity creates opportunity. But it also creates payroll, management, marketing pressure, and utilization risk. So would I consider mobile detailing a good business? For a weekend side hustle, the modeled economics can work. About $785 a month or $9,430 a year of economic profit at 2 base case jobs per week. For a full-time owner-operator, the base model reaches about $45,340 a year of economic profit at 10 jobs per week for 50 weeks. But what about turning it into an actual company? For a scalable company, the $50,000 monthly revenue example shows that the headline is possible in a real operation, but only after the business changes into something much more complex than one person detailing cars. And the number I would watch most closely is not the cost of soap. It is what each scarce hour earns after customer acquisition, travel, labor, and overhead. Because our base job leaves $90.68. The low price case leaves $18.91. The premium case leaves $206.95. And simply moving acquisition from $86 to $130 cuts the base economic profit to $46.68. That is a business where small changes in the wrong places can matter a lot. So my scorecard looks different from what I expected. Startup cost can begin around $1,500 to $2,500 for a lean setup, with the professional range around $3,500 to $6,000 and premium setups around $8,000 to $15,000. Profit potential ranges dramatically in our modeled jobs, from $18.91 to $90.68 to $206.95 of economic profit. Customer acquisition is not something I would describe as easy or hard with one adjective. The model uses about $86 per booked customer as the base case, $30 as the lower acquisition case, and $130 as the risk case. Scalability exists, but it changes the company. The real $50,000 a month example came with employees and a very different cost structure. Risk is real because acquisition alone can move the base job from $90.68 to $46.68. Weekend economics come to about $785 a month. Full-time economics come to about $45,340 a year of economic profit under the base assumptions. And my overall verdict is that mobile detailing can be an attractive local service business, but the advantage is not simply cheap supplies. It works when the price, job duration, travel, acquisition, repeat business, and available hours line up. I started this thinking the interesting part was the gap between the price of the chemicals and the price of the detail. Now I think that was the wrong gap. The important gap is between an hour that earns good economic profit and an hour that disappears into a cheap job, a long drive, an empty slot, or an expensive customer. The job is detailing cars. The business is managing profitable hours. And that left me with one more question. If the solo operator eventually runs out of hours, what actually happens to the economics when a service business hires its first employee?